All right. Moses said to the Lord, "You have been telling me, 'Lead these people,' but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, 'I know you by name,' and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your ways, so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people." The Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Then Moses said to him, "If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth?" Then the Lord said to Moses, "I would do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you, and I know you by name." Then Moses said, "Now, show me your glory." And the Lord said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But, he said, you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live. Then the Lord said, there is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen.
So I'd like to begin by introducing you to two different people. They're made-up people, but they're based on real lives. One is Radiant Rob. He loves God and he has a deep-seated joy. He's someone who's faced struggles, he's faced illness, he's had work dramas, but yet he actually radiates something special. His faith is obvious, it's actually visible. And every encounter that you have with him, he kind of leaves you encouraged. He keeps growing, he's becoming more and more like Christ each year. That's Radiant Rob. Now, on the other hand, there's Gloomy Greg. Hopefully no one here is called Greg. He's at church weekly, but it's actually out of habit rather than desire. He serves, but it's out of duty. There's little joy in his life. Conversations with him don't really leave you encouraged. Actually, it's more a complaining fest. He leaves feel discouraged. And his faith is actually growing bitter over time. Now, these are two extremes, but you probably know people, don't you, that sort of fit in those sort of areas. But the question is, which one of those two do you resemble more? Surely we'd want to be like Radiant Rob. We'd want to be reflecting God's glory and encouraging others. And it's worth thinking about what actually causes the difference between the two. Is it just that Radiant Rob's an optimist, whereas Greg's a pessimist? Is one just a glass half full kind of guy, others glass half empty? Now, actually, what we're going to look at today is the difference is caused by one of them seeing something that the other hasn't. You see, both these guys are just reflecting what they've been looking at. One is reflecting God's glory, the other is looking somewhere else. Now, we know this because a man called Moses, in today's story that we're looking at, he actually gets to see God's glory. He gets a vision of God and he's totally transformed by that. And so we're going to explore, well, how did this come about? How did he get to see God's glory? What even is God's glory? And how do I know whether I've seen it or not? And it's going to challenge us to think about whether God's glory has transformed us. Are we a Radiant Rob or a Gloomy Greg kind of guy or girl? Now that's our question for today. Are we people that reflect God's glory? So let's get into the story. Let's first see the reason why Moses gets to see God's glory. He just asks for it. He literally says, show me your glory. Now, before we see that, we need to kind of orientate ourselves. Where are we actually at in the Bible story? Or at the point where God's chosen nation is wandering through the wilderness. God spectacularly and graciously rescued them from slavery in Egypt, but since then they've been wandering and they've been grumbling. Just before this story, actually, they even decided to worship a golden calf instead of him. And this causes God to declare that he's actually not going to be with them to the promised land. God says, I can't be near this people anymore. But there's one person, Moses, who still has a relationship with him, and it's actually an amazingly close relationship. Moses is in this unique position where he gets to talk to God, he gets to speak to him. And as we read before, what does he ask? Verse 12. He says, you've been telling me, lead these people, but you've not let me know whom you'll send with me. You've said, I know you by name, and you've found favour with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your ways, so that I may know you and continue to find favour with you. Remember that this nation is your people. Moses is pleading with God. Remember, this is your people. Don't abandon them. They deserve your wrath, but keep going with them. May your presence be with them. God replies in verse 14, my presence will go with you and I'll give you rest. But that you there is only singular. He's only promising to go with Moses at this point. I'll go with you, not with that motley bunch. And so Moses isn't happy. He pushes back. Verse 15. He says, if your presence does not go with us, plural, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you're pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of earth? Now, Moses is desperate for God to be near his people. Moses knows there's no point in them getting to the promised land if God is not actually with them and in relationship with them. Without God's presence, they are nothing. Remarkable. God says, yes, verse 17, I will do the very thing you have asked, because I'm pleased with you, I know you by name. God's given him a chance. He's listened to Moses' plea. Now, you think that would be enough for Moses. Great, God's answered my question. But he lingers. Perhaps he's been inspired by that last sentence, I will do what you ask. Well, perhaps God will do one more thing that I might ask, he's thinking. And so what will he ask? He's got God's attention. God seems willing to answer. And there's so many things he could be asking, isn't it? Perhaps, can you change these people that you've got me leading, these Muppets? Can you please change this bunch of stiff-necked, unappreciative cow worshippers? Can you change these ex-slaves that just grumble at every step? I think I'd be asking that. Perhaps he might ask, can you just get us to this promised land ASAP? I'm sick of the sand, I'm sick of the dust. I've seen you doing plagues, I've seen you parting Red Seas, can't you just sort of beam us to Canaan? Surely he'd ask that. But no, Moses wants something else. So what does he ask? Verse 18. He says, now show me your glory. Show me your glory. And Moses has kind of crossed the line a bit with this request. His deepest desire is not the things of God. His deepest desire is not just to find, favour from God, but no, he wants God himself. Show me your radiance, he's praying. Flex your biceps. Show me the S on your chest. Show me your preeminence, your heart-stopping, ground-shaking, extra spectacularness. Moses is saying, forget money, forget power, forget health. I want more God. Please. I want to see more of your glory. Stun me with your strength, numb me with your wisdom, steal my breath with a brush of yours. What a request this actually is, yeah? How different is it to what we often pray? Because of Jesus, we actually get to speak to God directly like Moses got to, but we often settle with, please God, give me a good day. Please God, make sure the weather's okay for this event I've got on. Please God, make sure no one gets hurt. Perish the thought someone might get hurt at that event. Please God, give me that promotion or that boy or that girl. Should we be asking and said, God, show me your glory. Reveal yourself to me. We live in a world with problems. We've got dying bodies, we've got a planet full of trouble. There's war, there's cancer, there's anxiety. There's all these issues, and yes, we should bring them to God. But what actually we need most is a glimpse of God's glory. A sighting of God's glory can actually change you forever. Perhaps, the reason you're a gloomy Greg type of Christian is actually because you've never asked God to show you his glory. Perhaps you've settled for much smaller things. Perhaps your requests to God revolve around you rather than him. But would you dare actually ask him, God, show me your glory? What a big prayer. So Moses, he doesn't ask for a smooth journey to Canaan. He asks to see God's glory. And wow, God answers that request. Look at verse 19. God says, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you. I'll proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. Now Moses, we read it before, he's going to have to stand in a rock cleft while God's glory passes by. He's only going to be able to see God's back. That's all he'll be able to handle, but he gets to see God's glory. But the next question is, well, what's God's glory actually going to look like? What's he going to see? And what's super interesting is we actually don't really hear about what he sees, but instead what he hears. That's more important. If we jump to chapter 34, verse 6. As he passed in front of Moses, he proclaimed, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. Now, God reveals his true glory, and perhaps it's not really what we're expecting it to be. It's actually his character. Yeah, he's a God that can send plagues, he can part seas, he appear in fiery clouds. Isaiah 42 says, he measures the waters in his hand. But actually his glory, his greatness, according to himself and what he reveals, actually lies in his character. Now his glory is his mercy, his compassion. His glory is his love and faithfulness. His glory is his ability to forgive sin while maintaining justice. Sin will be dealt with, but forgiveness is also available. Perhaps a God who punishes sin doesn't really sound that glorious to us. We need to actually wrestle, don't we, with what we're being seen as God revealing to himself here. Perhaps we want God's glory just to be a warm and fuzzy glow or a flash of lightning. Next week, we're going to deal actually a lot more with this element of God dealing with sin, and that's part of God's glory. But for now, just notice, Moses asks to see God's glory. He doesn't see a lightning display, doesn't see a beautiful rainbow, doesn't see a waterfall. No, God reveals who he is, what he's like. And that's actually jaw-dropping, that he both punishes sin but forgives and loves a stiff-necked people like Israel, like us. As I said, we often admire God's glory in creation. We love the sunset, we love the beautiful beach, we love the waterfall, the stars. But if that's all we ever think God's glory is, we're actually limiting him. Imagine taking a family holiday up to the Gold Coast theme parks, and you've done a road trip, you're driving up there, but then you stop 30 kilometres short at a sign for Dreamworld. You pull up, set up the caravan and go, right kids, we've arrived. We've made it to Dreamworld. Likewise, don't just stop at the signs of God's glory. Keep actually going to what the sign is pointing to, his glorious character. Now, after seeing this glory, Moses does the most logical thing he can do. He bows down and worships God. He asks him again to take his people with him, and God says these awesome words in verse 10. He says, I'm making a covenant with you. Before all the people, I'll do wonders never before done in any nation in all the world. The people you live among will see how awesome is the work that I, the Lord, will do for you. The covenant's renewed. God's with his people again. Moses has seen God's glory. It revolves around God showing mercy, God loving and blessing a people that frankly just don't deserve it. But once Moses has seen this glory, he's actually totally transformed. Look at verse 29. He comes back down off the mountain and he doesn't realise it, but his face is radiant. Verse 30, when Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant. They were afraid to come near him. He's been radically changed. He is glowing. Not like someone who forgot to put sunscreen on, the first day of the Tassie summer. Not that sort of glowing, but, in a supernatural, stunning kind of way. You look at him and you know something has happened to this guy. He's seen something spectacular. He's seen God's glory. And it's actually, it's a beautiful moment in the history of Israel and Moses. But did you notice the tension that's actually still there? The people are afraid when they see him. And there's also another tension that this radiant face actually fades over time. It doesn't last. Look at verse 33. When Moses finishes speaking to them, he puts a veil over his face. But whenever he entered the Lord's presence to speak with him, he removed the veil until he came out. And when he came out and told Israel what had been commanded, then they saw that his face was radiant. Moses would put the veil over his face until he went to speak with the Lord. You know, Moses doesn't want to see this radiant face wearing off. He covers his face with a veil and he has to kind of go back and recharge the face, so to speak. But what it actually points to is that, you know, as good as this is, you know, Moses is reflecting God's glory, you know, something better was coming, something permanent. You know, Moses' radiant face, that just wears away over time. But there was a radiance that was coming that was going to be forever. You know, Moses' radiance is just like a little candle compared to the blazing sun that was about to come. Let's move on to that as we think about show the greatest glory. Now, if we move to the New Testament, you know, we see a much greater glory in Jesus, don't we? You know, God became man, entered the world as Jesus. You know, he was needed because throughout the whole Old Testament, the people just kept breaking that covenant. You know, despite seeing Moses lit up like a Christmas tree, despite all the supernatural provisions God had provided, they just kept turning away from God. They kept breaking the relationship time and time again. And so Jesus was needed to come and actually restore that in a permanent way. The writer of Hebrews, we're going to look at Hebrews later in the year, but there's a beautiful thing that's said about the new glory that comes in Jesus. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son. The Son is the radiance of God's glory, the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty in heaven. If you want to see God's glory now, you don't have to hide in a rock cleft. If you want to see God's glory now, the Father's glory, you get to see it through the Son. In Jesus, we see all of God's grace, his holiness, his wisdom. And we see his power, we see his love, we see his justice, we see his mercy. And when we look at Jesus in the gospel story, when he sees his life, what he taught, what he spoke about, we see God's glory. And we especially see it when we see Jesus taking the punishment for our sins. We see God, the very essence of his beauty, his glory at that moment. God's forgiving us without, sweeping sin under the carpet. Now, in 2 Corinthians 3, Paul compares Jesus' glory with Moses' glory. This New Testament passage is really key to understand what's going on with Moses and applying it to us today. It's quite wordy. You could do a whole sermon on it, but just see the big point being made. Now, if the ministry that brought death, which was engraved in letters on stone, came with glory, so the Israelites could not look steadily at the face of Moses because of its glory, transitory though it was, will not the ministry of the Spirit be even more glorious? If the ministry that brought condemnation was glorious, how much more glorious is the ministry that brings righteousness? For what was glorious had no glory now in comparison with the surpassing glory. And if what was transitory came with glory, how much greater is the glory that which lasts? We can be blown away by what happened with Moses, the glory he beheld. But what Moses, the old covenant, the old law represented is just nothing compared to Jesus. It's a dim light. Moses' glory would fade, Jesus' glory is forever. And then look at verse 12. It's actually amazing, isn't it? If you have faith in Jesus, you actually get to reflect this new and everlasting glory. Look at verse 12. Therefore, since we have such hope, we are very bold. We're not like Moses, who'd put a veil over his face to prevent the Israelites from seeing the end of what was passing away. And then the climax comes, verse 18. What do Christians get to do? What do people who've seen the truth of Jesus get to do? And we all, who with unveiled faces contemplate, or another translation, reflect the Lord's glory, are being transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. Do you get the gist? People who have faith in Jesus, people who have seen the glory of Jesus, actually get to radiate that glory out to other people. Unlike Moses' glory that would fade, our radiance won't fade. We're going to get brighter and brighter and brighter until Jesus returns. And so, I've raced through that, but let's land with the takeaway. If you're a Christian, if you have faith in Jesus, if you've seen his glory, you should be glowing. Yeah, you should be radiant. Why? Because you've seen the radiance of Jesus. It should be bouncing off you. And I've had the privilege of seeing plenty of people like this. There are plenty of radiant Robs in this church. There's even a radiant Ron. I've seen people who have clearly encountered Jesus. I've seen, they've got struggles, they've got tough things going on in their life, but they're glowing. They're a joy to be around. People who delight and love Jesus. But on the flip side, I've seen plenty of gloomy Gregs as well. And don't worry, I'm not going to point anyone out here. But there are people, aren't there, that actually just don't have that glow. There are people whose faces light up, but it's actually only when they're talking about sport or their hobbies or holidays. There are people who just actually seem to be going through the motions when it comes to living as a Christian. Why is that? Well, it's probably a bit like the old saying, you are what you eat. A similar one applies. You actually reflect what you look at. You reflect what you look at. If you're only ever looking at things that are weak and insignificant, if you're only ever looking at things that are actually fading away, then your reflection will be weak and insignificant and fading away. Sorry to say it. Whereas if you're looking at a reflection, if your reflection and what you're looking at is this big, bright, infinitely glorious thing of Jesus, that's what your reflection will be like. It'll be radiant. The more you look at Jesus, the more you consider what he's done, the more you'll light up, the more you'll actually show others the greatest glory. And so imagine if we were a church community that were just reflecting God's glory. Imagine if we were people who were just so soaked in Jesus that we were just permanently lit up. People would notice that, wouldn't they? Imagine the impact that would have on our family, our friends, on Blackman's Bay this year. Isn't that something we want to strive for? We want to pray for that this year, don't we? That we'd both see and reflect God's glory. And so we started with me talking about two people, Radiant Rob and Gloomy Greg. To finish then, let me introduce you to two more people. Let's call them Ken and Kelly. Again, hopefully no one here by that name. But Ken and Kelly have actually just recently moved to Blackman's Bay. And unknowingly, they've actually got connected to a bunch of people from here, from Bay, at this church. They live in Wyndham Court, so they've got Neil and Kayleen as neighbours. Ken works at UTAS, so through that has met Jackie and Nigel. Ken's also foolish enough to play Masters AFL football for Kingborough, so through that he's met Tim, Ben and I. Kelly works at Blackman's Bay Primary and so knows Renee. She gets her hair cut at Jacadri, so you guessed it, Nat Nelly knew as her hairdresser. Their house is in the middle of a reno, which Katrina and Jesse are running, and Brad's doing the electrical work. Bit of nepotism there. And then on top of all that, their teenage daughter works at Macca's and knows Liv. One night, Ken and Kelly are sitting around the table together. They're talking and they're going, what on earth is it with all these people we've met from Bay? Compared to all these other connections we're making, those people from Bay, they're different in some way. Or they are different, perhaps they have something different, we're not sure. Those people from Bay, they just keep glowing. They're joyful, they're radiant. What on earth is going on in that building every Sunday morning? Is there some sort of special water they're passing around? Ken and Kelly can't help but notice. They can't help but be attracted. The evidence is overwhelming, and they're soon going to find out we're not drinking special water, no, it's who we're looking at. They'll soon find out we are not glorious people at all. The reason we're radiant is because we're reflecting the glory of Jesus, the greatest glory. And so let me pray now that we here at Bay will actually see the glory of Jesus this year, that we will soak in that, we'd reflect it, and that the Ken and Kellys out there, it'd be actually cool if Ken and Kelly came along to here, but that they'd see the glory for themselves. Let me pray. Dear God, we thank you for this story of Moses getting to see your glory and being radiant because of it. But we thank you that a greater and more permanent glory came in Jesus. Thank you for the glory of him coming to earth, revealing your nature to us. The love he showed, the care for others, the compassion, the healing, the teachings. But thank you for showing us his self-sacrifice for us. Thank you for that glory, that beauty, that mercy, that compassion. Father, help us at Bay this year to soak in that, to keep looking at that rather than things that are just wasting away. And Father, help us reflect that glory to the people around us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.